Welcome, educators, parents, and scholar gamers to the Academy of Esports podcast. This is the podcast where James O'Hagan delves into topics surrounding esports and education. Esports are organized competitive video games allowing schools to redefine their athletic culture, diversify opportunities for student participation, promote physical and mental health, increase collegiate scholarship pathways, and play games. We can never forget the importance of play. The mission of the Academy of Esports is to support these ideals. The vision of the Academy of Esports is for all students to experience the fun and joy of playing competitive video games. Let's get started.
I equate this time that we're in right now to like what it was, say, like 1900s, and football was just coming on board. Okay, where it was, we're still in a wild west phase. There's still people even still trying to figure out, what games are going to be around, which ones are going to last the longest. Like right now, I know Smite and Arena of Valor are coming on strong, and people are starting to ask questions. Are we going to pick that up? What's going to be interesting to me to just see what's going to happen in the near future is what games are going to be around in 5 years, or in 3 years, or in a year. Which ones are going to be the ones that kids are going to be really gravitating towards? There's Fortnite. Fortnite has made so many announcements about, hey, we're going to become this formal competitive league thing, and everything is fizzled. And I think I don't know why it's doing that, but it is. And it might still be a flash in the pan. I don't know, but we're kind of still trying to figure out. Even discussions I've had even with some designers is I look at the way that we're setting up our arenas, right? Where we look at how people sit in these spaces. And usually they're for the crowd to be able to see the people, right? They're able to see the competitors. And as they're sitting up there, they're all sitting in a straight line, typically. They've got headsets on and they're talking through their microphone, which is great, okay? However, what I notice is when you sit like that, the one thing that you lose is you lose eye contact and you lose those nonverbal cues. I think a group that has started to kind of figure out the landscape of sitting and design of an esports competitive space, and the ones I think that are making it really intimate and making it really seem very where you can look at those nonverbal cues and allow teammates to communicate in those ways, is the NBA. The NBA 2K League, if you notice their arena, they have basically, it's like the people are on over the top looking down on the competitors, and the competitors are sitting in a round. Now, the competitors don't necessarily see each other the way they're sitting, but at least they've got the intimacy factor built in. They're not building it for, say, for tens of thousands of people to come watch them compete. They're building it for, say, a couple hundred people to come in and watch them compete, because they know that where most people are going to watch it is going to be on Twitch, or they're going to watch it over YouTube, or wherever the NBA is broadcasting it. So they're designing it for watching it on the web, not for an arena space. But like I said, even the arena spaces, I feel like, are not designed well enough to bring in an intimate thing. Like, they're still doing like, here's the stage and here's the straight lineup. So you're talking about just things like that are going to be changing in the next few years. So
that is hell of interesting, because that is the space where I'm really fascinated. We talk about gesture control. Where is this thing going? How do you maintain interest? How do you maintain that high? Because Fortnite as a BR is it's hyper intensive, hyperactive, hyper focused. But at some point, we're all going to sit around and be like, well, I've had enough of that. Mm-hmm. It's time for something new. There's only but so much bandwidth you have for super high fast action, super speed, hyper everything. Everything is like jumped up. How long does that really last? And League of Legends has been going on strong, but it's sitting at around 7 to 8 years. So
without
is it
much
time
difference other than the champions have changed?
Yeah. Exactly, right? And Dota 2 had to go through its kind of ups and downs, and then kind of ramp up again with some new when Dota 2 came out. But again, still yet at some point, we're going to see not people just leaving, but people kind of migrating. And that's what I've seen in my studies, people, how they migrate, how the students are migrating in groups, and evolving. Mm-hmm. And it's also because they're adolescents, so they're growing up. But I think that's a great sample because we always grow. We are always going to be growing. We're not going to be playing the same game for 20 years. We might play it a little bit, but we're looking to evolve.
Well, StarCraft being I would call StarCraft being an outlier, but there's games that we play intergenerationally. I mean, Super Mario Brothers. That's one that speaks to 2 or 3 different generations of people now. Grand Theft Auto. I mean, when was the last time Grand Theft Auto came out? Was it 6 or 7 years ago? And it's still one of the top selling games. Yes. People are still buying it. Yes. They're still creating new content for it. But that's where I said it's going to be like, which of these are going to be flash in the pan and which of these are going to be the long-standing ones. My kids made fun of me recently. They make fun of me a lot. That's okay. But because I wanted to play the game Undertale, and I saw it was available for Switch, and it was like $25. And I loved the game. In fact, I played it through 3 different times to get the different endings that you could get in Undertale.
Nice.
And I was telling them, like, boy, I really love this game. And they're like, that game's old. They're almost like, I'm like, but it's a great story. They wrote a fantastic story here. It's like, it teaches you that you don't have to attack everything. You can work things through by either fleeing or by granting mercy to somebody or talking to them. I mean, it was really kind of a cool concept. Very different than every game I'd ever seen. So, but yeah, they made fun of me because it was an old game.
So, I think I saw it on your Twitter feed that you just finished it up and you were excited. You're like, yeah, I just finished it and it was awesome.
It really is. As far as games go, if anybody's listening to the podcast and they want a game that's going to make you feel good and just like has a really kind of cool story and it will take you in so many different directions you didn't anticipate or ever guess. You think this is just some dumb kids game. It's not. It truly is a story that you are going through. It's like a choose your own adventure, and the choices that you make from the start of the game to the end of the game have an impact throughout how the whole experience takes place. So
that's definitely one of the biggest reasons why I call them motive objects. They motivate you, and they're able to be. I call them motive objects. So from a chat perspective, which is cultural historical activity theory, I look at why people do the things that they do, what motivates them to do it, because researchers, we want to understand stuff. And so with games, people have a motive. They have a motive object. There's a motivation that has that engages them, that drives them, but it's also something that they can obtain. They can see it's an actual artifact at some point, just like a PhD. A PhD is a great example of a motive object. It's something that you have to work towards, and then it generates all this other learning and activities along the way, and conflict too. But then there's an artifact. At the end of the day, you have this thing, and you actually become something else, which is really, really neat. So that, I think, would be great for people that are feeling those stories. I think that when I talk to kids, they're always just like, I love the stories. I like to be in a movie. I like to make the decisions, but I want to be the actor. They participate.
It's funny, Jason, we're almost 20 minutes into this and we haven't even introduced you.
That's cool.
So, Jason, why don't you take a moment and because you started to talk about having a PhD, and because I read a good portion of your dissertation. I didn't get through almost all 300 pages of it, but I did.
Okay, yeah.
I did read a good portion of it. Please introduce yourself to everybody so that we know who we're talking to here.
One of the only ones that actually read the thing. So it is. I am Dr. Jason Engerman. I'm at East Stroudsburg University as an assistant professor in the digital media marketing department. My focus and research is on underrepresented populations and interactive media. I like to find out how they use and leverage the tools around them, the digital tools, to transform their lives. And my real interest is definitely liberating those unheard voices through those tools. And specifically what I did in terms of my research was boys in gaming. I looked at boys as an underrepresented population, especially considering the fact that They're 4 times more likely to be labeled ADHD. They're twice as likely to be suspended, or 3 times as likely to be expelled, and the list goes on.
Mm-hmm.
And interestingly enough, it's not just in the U.S. It's actually worldwide.
Really?
OECD data tells us, that's organization data about 35 plus countries, tells us that reading and writing scores for males around the world are down from young women. And also prisons are filled with more men than women.
Mm-hmm.
So we see a great interesting migration happening, especially considering that women graduate probably about 60%, somewhere in there, compared to boys. So we're seeing a very interesting change in the landscape of educated individuals being primarily women, and filling those workplaces where young men are not. They're not finding jobs and work as readily as they used to be. So I wanted to look at games. I wanted to look at games because it made sense. I'm a gamer. I love gaming. And it's a space where a lot of people feel like they can belong. If I'm not a physical, strapping athlete,
Mm-hmm.
it's definitely something that I probably would get into, considering that these young people are growing up in the digital age. So this is the space that they communicate. It is the space that they make sense of the world. It is a space where they congregate, they socialize, and where they feel at home. So let's look at it and see what's up. And so the competitive part came out. And so esports is now where I want to take and leverage, especially for STEM skills. So that was a long introduction. I did a lot of talking.
No, it's a great introduction because you brought up a lot of interesting ideas too. I mean, we're talking about when you say, and when we're talking about in gaming, underrepresented isn't just. I think people may go, wait a second, isn't gaming mostly boys anyway? Like how do you mean underrepresented in a gaming space if it's already what we think is mostly boys as a stereotype?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, underrepresented is a really interesting term. Underrepresented, marginalized. It's a broad brush. I grew up in an urban environment. I grew up in the Bronx. I'm born and raised in the Bronx, moved to Queens. It wasn't until I was 16, 17 where I moved to Pennsylvania. And seeing that type of underrepresented population, it was obviously majority people of color, and that's what we would normally associate with underrepresentation. Then I moved to a rural environment, and my entire research was done with boys from a rural environment who were also underrepresented. And it was underrepresented in the socioeconomic sense because the school that I taught at and did the research on was 60% free and reduced lunch, but also just being male. 95% of kindergarten teachers happen to be female. And, somewhere between 60 to 70% of teachers in general from K-12 are female. So it's a huge disproportion in the space of leadership in terms of who's in charge. And not saying that all women are poor or bad, but we tend to have similar experiences and similar ways of thinking, and there is a division between men and women from a primatological perspective, from an anthropological perspective, from a social perspective. So those experiences, they impact how we make decisions and how we envision and view what is good, what is bad, what is high quality versus low quality. And there's a ton of studies that I can pull out and talk about in terms of how women in the classroom rate and grade students based on behavior, and mostly males are marginalized in that way. So underrepresented men, it was an easy pick for me because it's how I felt, and it's how many other boys feel. And so that work, I've done that work for quite some time underneath Dr. Ali Card-Shellman. She's done fantastic work. She's done a great TED Talk, and she also speaks to the use of games to re-engage boys. So that's my training.
What's the name of the TED Talk that she does?
Re-engaging boys. Video games re-engaging boys.
I'll make sure to put that into the show notes so that we have it, so that somebody can find it right away, and you'll be able to link. I'll link directly to it. I mean,
Great.
Yeah, because some of the things that I've talked about with esports has been, and why we're talking a lot, and we were connected through a common colleague that we both have, because one of the ways I approach esports is that if we focus on the games and just say, hey, let's just have competitive tournaments and just play a bunch of games, and we lose out on this bigger opportunity that we have to really engage a whole lot of different kids in different ways. And one of the things that's always been interesting is, oh, you sent me a link. There we go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We can now actually use esports to help students, as you say, especially ones who are maybe underrepresented, and underrepresented can be defined by whatever your school's population could be, by allowing them the opportunity to develop brands and develop a social media presence, to develop their own presence, to develop their own sense of agency and self that a lot of times they don't have. I also know, too, that one of the things we have to be sensitive to, and I actually had a discussion, an online back and forth, I guess you could say, with Will Richardson just yesterday, about how he said, well, why don't we just share things with the world? Why, instead of just turning in an assignment, why don't we share it with others? And I said, if we're going to ask students to develop their voice and their agency, we also have to honor the fact that a lot of kids are also going to say, I don't want to do that. I don't feel comfortable sharing with others, like with the world. And the reason why I kind of was taken aback by that, because he said with the world, and I think he was saying it more like in a general sense, not actual literal sense, but more like, you could do it with a peer review or something. But even sharing something with a peer sometimes can be frightening for a child. So when we're developing these students' voices, helping them to develop their voices, this is where relationships come in. This is where having those adult teacher-student interactions becomes important, because we can understand and know where a child's mindset may be as far as their want to, or their comfort in sharing things with others, to help them then develop that brand. Taking those steps, we might have to scaffold or structure things for a child a little differently. For one who's more like, I'm not comfortable doing this, I've got a variety of different reasons why I don't want to share it. Sometimes they don't feel comfortable just sharing. Other times it's for their own personal safety that they don't want to share. They don't want a digital footprint of their face or their name or something out there. So we have to be very careful about how we structure this conversation, especially when we're talking with other educators, especially when you've got a lot of clout, like a Will Richardson, who says, share it with the world. And a teacher who doesn't know any better just goes, yeah, we're just going to start sharing this with the world, and is putting every kid's work out there for everybody to find out. And now it's like you're creating a whole bunch of other things that you really didn't intend to have happen. You had the best of intentions going into it, but creating possibly the worst situations. And parents don't understand that at all a lot of times either. They don't understand what that means when you say share it with the world. So with all this, while we want to help the underrepresented have a voice, especially like with children, we have to take a step back and go, okay, now what does that really look like? How do we build that?
That's such a powerful statement. Yeah, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, you're fine. I'm done.
Okay. Yeah, that's such a powerful statement, and it brings up a lot of things that we talk about with transformational experiences, number one, but also educational change. What games initially started out as, and games in education started out as a calling card by James G. to the scholars to say games have incredible value, inherent value. We need to capture that and use it in schools. But what he was really saying, if you read his work and sit down and talk to him, as I have, and all of his students that have followed him, we need to change schools. Mm-hmm. That's really what we need, to use games and allow games to help us change what schools are and what they're doing. And what that means, and what esports really is an example of, is it is the rebel. It is the rebel in the classroom that says, no, I'm not going to do it that way. Or the one that asks too many questions. Mm-hmm. the one that's, asking questions and challenging the teacher, maybe not directly, but indirectly around giving up some power. And that's a crazy, crazy, crazy thought or idea, because we know human development tells us that, children are underdeveloped. They are not very great at decision making. We know this. This is true. They're not great because they act before they think. There's lots of data about the brain and the neuroplasticity that happens, and the frontal lobe is underdeveloped that makes good reasoned decisions. Okay, I get all that. But nonetheless, if the world is changing and the ideal goal of education is to help prepare students for the world, is what we're doing in the classroom actually meeting that goal? And a really good question to ask yourself is, at the end of that experience, it's 13 years, what are they able to do? That's a great question to ask. In the 1970s, they were able to get certifications and start a job and start making a living at 18. It's okay for us at 18 to send them off to go fight in wars, right? And put their life on the line. That's okay. But for some reason, our only choice for education is they have to go to college. Okay, so I'm spending 13 years in a system that hasn't prepared me yet for the world. And what's interesting is this, just being honest, coming from the corporate side of things, we put them through a 13-year experience, then say, okay, there's another 4 to 5 year experience that you must have, and probably you should do another 2 years to get the master's. Then they go out and they work in the workplace and they say, you know what, you need about 3 more to 6 more weeks of our boot camp to put you through. So you mean to tell me 13 plus 4 plus 2 right? 13 plus 4 plus 2. I mean, we sitting at about 19 years here. What have I gained exactly so that I can actually make a living? It's an interesting question that we must ask ourselves, because we're putting our kids in $1.3 trillion of debt. Hopefully I'm not speaking in circles, and I'm making a point that if our education systems have done what we have said that they can do and should do, that's the promise, we take them for 13 years, then by the time they're 18, it would make sense to me that they would be ready to begin making a living. That's to me, that makes sense. We are preparing them for the world. We're preparing them for the world, right? So by 18, they should be prepared, right? And if they want to go to college, that's a fantastic idea. You can do some more things possibly and gain some more experiences. But games force us, if done well and done right and used correctly, to really transform the power structures in the classroom. And that involves us saying, teachers, you don't know everything. You don't have all the answers. You need to allow the students to make some decisions and help guide them. I love the example that you gave when you were just talking about students and just they need some guidance. There's no question about that, because some of them, according to Myers-Briggs, they may be introvert. They may be more introverted. They may want to play a back role. When you do a production, there's the talent that's out in front of the camera, but there's a ton more people sitting behind the camera. You've got lighting, and you've got production, and you've got directors, and you've got light people. You've got all these people in the back end, and they need to fill those roles too. So what if we did something crazy? And this is what my advisor and I propose. It's called user design in teaching. Why don't we have them create their own goals? Why don't we have them create their own objectives and have them write them well, right? And their own vision statements and their own mission statements, and then measure a growth measurement of how well they do at meeting those goals that they set for themselves. It's crazy. But esports really shouts at us and tells us, I'm not doing it that way. They're rebels. They're like, I'm not doing that, because guess what? If I can't be okay over here, then I'm just going to shift over here to this other area that makes more sense for me and my friends and my new friend group, and I can evolve in that way. So this is an interesting time and an interesting opportunity, especially as you said, you start to break the traditional ties and be a disruptor. And Christensen talks about diffusion of innovation. Disruption. I can't get it right. Innovate. I'm going to get it right. That's going to bother me.
Well, one of the things that while you're looking that up, one of the things that you're talking about, when we talk about bringing gaming into schools, right? One of the things that I noticed that since I started teaching in 1999 and I started at an elementary school, was that I used to take the kids out for recess. They used to have their lunch recess, and I'd take them out at the end of the day. And sometimes I'd try to even fit a third recess in, a chance to run around and play. I used to get backlash from other teachers because I was letting kids go out and play. It was almost like, there's these people who are like, if you don't get up before 5 in the morning, then you've wasted the whole day. Well, I'm one of those people who likes to work until 2 a.m. If you gave me my choice, I'm working until 2 a.m. and I'm sleeping until 10 or 11 in the morning, and then my day starts. Like, I'm sorry, I'm not on military time here, but this is the way I do things.
Right. Right.
But we've even to even get to the point of where you're talking about, we have to go back all the way to preschool, and we have to honor play, and we don't even honor play in schools anymore. Mm-hmm. And that's where you're talking about where kids get to make those decisions. Kids, it's structured, but it's not. There's a teacher out there or an adult who's just making sure that a kid doesn't kill another kid or a fight break out or something. But the kids are out there making their own groups. They are figuring out how to socialize with each other. They're figuring out who's going to be my friend. They're making choices constantly. Not just who's going to be my friend. Who's the kid who I just like, I don't jive well with this kid, so I know I'm going to stay away from this one. Mm-hmm. This is the game that I like. These are the kids I like to play with. They're setting up their rules. They're setting up their social structures. We've taken that completely out of their hands.
And it's devastating.
Yeah.
It's devastating. So you've been reading my dissertation, so that's all there. So the playcology is exactly what that's about. So did you know that a study was done around apes? And there are two really interesting studies. One was done around apes, and the one that was done around apes showed that without play, if a male ape didn't have play, they turned out to be more violent. Yeah, that's Brown's work. Yeah, Brown did that type of work because he did animals in the wild. And so primatologically, if you don't have access to how it translates for humans is if we don't have access to rough and tumble play, especially from the boys' perspective, you lose sight of boundaries.
Oh, yeah.
You lose sight, of rules and structure, and you lose sight of a healthy relationship. So if I'm not taught early on, here's what love is and what it looks like in a healthy way, and here's what good boundaries are. I'm inherently, I have a draw to competition and dominance as a male. That's just biologically what it is. Primatologically, that's what it is. And first of all, I need to express those, right, and play with those, experience them. And then I need to find out where the boundaries are. Well, without that understanding of where the boundaries are and having multiple good mentors coming around and showing that, I become more violent. And this is actually shown to play itself out in prison as well. Prison research has shown that those that are the most violent crimes, the most violent in prison, they're the ones that didn't have healthy father figures in their lives and healthy structural boundary around behavior at all. So you got to think about what we're doing. If we're stripping those opportunities away for students to do what we call play, right? And play is defined characteristically in 4 parts. Voluntary. It's bound by time and space. The third one is the most important. It's order-making activity. Okay, and I forget the fourth one, but
That's okay.
I forget. It's been a while. But the order-making activity, philosophically and empirically, is really important because this is how we make sense of the world around us: objects, ideas, people, relationships. And if I can't express those in a way that's free-flowing, in the way that allows me to make decisions, then there could be a counterbalance to it that could be really, really negative. So we're creating like little monsters possibly. We start taking these things away.
And we can't figure out why they don't want to learn. We can't figure out why we're going to add minutes to a school day. We're not going to put any more play in, but we want to spend more time on reading and writing and math because the big horror is if they're not reading at 3rd grade level by the time they're in 3rd grade, then we're going to, there's that catch up. But at the same time, we're not, as you're talking about, the importance of play. You just outlined what the importance of play is. we're not even putting dollars into play. And here's what I mean. I drive around my community of Racine, right? I drive by every elementary school. Playgrounds are sad. They're sad. Or there's not a playground.
Right.
I look at it, it's like there's just these little jungle gym things, and that's it. There's no whimsy. There's there's some great playgrounds. You know, when you drive by a great playground, as an adult, you go, I wish I had that playground when I was a kid, because if I would have been there every day. I would have been running around on it. I would have been wasting all my time there. Mom would have to call me in. Even if there was cell phones and all this other stuff, I would still be sitting out there playing. And I drive by our school environments, and it's like we put so many dollars into curriculum. Oh, we've got the best curriculum. We've got the best teachers. But if all you're working for is that state mandated test, just so you're not put on a warning list, what have you really done? And then what have you told kids about that's important in their lives? You're saying that if there's a kid who really loves to play and you're telling him, well, that's not important, this is, well, now an adult has said play isn't important to a child. And then what does that do generationally? What does that do for that? You're a grown man or a grown woman, and your kid is just like, I want to go out and play. And you're just like, but you're saying play isn't important to them because that's the lesson that you learned in school, because you got to do all your homework and you got to do tests and all this other stuff. And I had parents who pushed back on me because they thought I was giving their kids too much opportunity to play. But I'll tell you what, my kids did just as well as the other classes did. They weren't any better scores, but they weren't any worse. And I would say that the class of kids were a lot tighter. I had a self-contained class, right? And I would say that group of kids were tighter as a family than the other classes.
That's everything. That is everything. In my research, all I see, and this is what moved me toward the type of entrepreneurship that I do, mastermind groups, things of that nature. You can't move alone. And overwhelmingly, these individual ubiquitous tools, we call them cell phones, and mobile devices, they have the I component, right? iPad, iPhone, and we've individualized ourselves, which is dangerous. We were never meant to be isolated. And we start to see more solo entrepreneurship popping out of the entrepreneurial communities, but those aren't the ones that are most successful. And those aren't the ones that actually, and when I talk about entrepreneurship, it's a philosophy of how to leverage your skills and talents as you see fit to live the life that you truly desire. Because we're all entrepreneurs. We just sell ourselves to one big client if you work for another person. But when you get together in a group, when you tribe up, it's a powerful thing. Again, I come from the city, so I know a lot about the mob. And I know about gangs. Yeah. But they were powerful institutions, though, and they were incredibly effective, and they were incredibly useful and served a purpose. And the reason that they existed was to protect the group inside. They were to generate wealth for the group and the tribe. And so there's a lot of love there, although in some cases and places, in talking to gangs, it might be dysfunctional, but it's made up of a bunch of dysfunctional people. So what can you expect? But that is human, though. That's what it means to be human. And I think that esports really, at the heart of it, really captures that well, as people group together, as they team up, as they build communities, as they challenge each other. But the piece that's missing for me as an entrepreneur myself is the give back, is the sharing, right? In all the resources. So we talk about capital. Capital, say we talk social capital, we talk about natural capital, mechanical capital, financial capital. But the financial capital isn't, is not reciprocated except through Twitch. And YouTube keeps slashing all the rates, right? So in that sense, when I see esports, I see the top 10% making all of the money, and 90% making nada, but they're still contributing to it, right? And so there's this dysfunction and this disconnect, because it's hard to tell a 16-year-old, look, I know that you want to spend 8 hours a day, playing games. And that's what they'll do. They'll spend 8 hours, even more a day, right, playing games. and they may be on the professional track. But the question I have is, you're spending hundreds of dollars a month, right? Hundreds of dollars a month. When and how are you seeing that back? Now, if you're a Twitch streamer, it might be easier to see some of it back, but you're still working at negative cash flow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, you got 100 going out and maybe 50 coming back. You got 100 going out, 25 coming back. You do the math. You do the math on this. It's a messed up relationship. So,
but even when we look at the people who are like the top, let's just use Ninja as the top because he's the name that everybody knows on Twitch. He didn't just show up. He didn't just show up with millions of followers. He's been doing this for 10 years. I mean, he was playing Halo before, and then he developed a following. It wasn't just I'm just going to show up, and it wasn't just him playing games. He's a personality. He has a personality. I see you.
No, I'm just doing. I'll show you that later. Go ahead.
Okay,
I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, you're fine.
He's a dual threat.
Yeah,
he's a dual threat. So in the esports community, there are some people that are game. They straight up, they are professionals. They freaking kick your butt anytime, anywhere, in tournament, all day long.
Mm-hmm.
But then there are also influencers and so there at the beginning there sometimes was a divide, but he was able to marry both of those together. Usually you have one edged swords, you know. you're gaming, you're kicking ass, and that's a lot of energy and time to do that,
right,
to be really, 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 really good. This whole idea of digital media marketing and broadcasting and putting yourself out there is something new. Twitch allowed you to do that, right? So before it was what you call it, TV. I forget what, Justin TV.
Oh yeah.
It was Justin TV beforehand. Michael Seibel put that thing together. So now you got this ninja guy who was able to marry the two in an incredible way, and we still have people that are they're goofing around and they're influencers and they're great, but you put them in a tournament and they're getting smashed.
Oh.
They're getting smashed by they're everyone that's an influencer and a person out, they're not all the best. They're not always the greatest.
If you called me an influencer, you'd be giving me a lot of respect. But I will say that if we're ever put into like a situation where it's like, hey, do you want to be part of this tournament? You just don't want me to be on your team. I know you did I know your research was around Call of Duty. Let me tell you about my Call of Duty experience. My Call of Duty experience is, James, go out that direction, go straight out, and we want to just know where everybo's at because we know you're going to get killed anyway. So just go straight ahead so we can find everybody, and you just tell us where they're at.
Yeah. You're bait, man.
that was my job.
Yeah, I felt like that was a good job. Yeah, everyone's got to play their role, man. Right. Everyone's got to play their role. That's hilarious.
Jason, I feel like we've got enough for several episodes probably in us still, and I don't want to. I want to kind of divide this up because I feel like this has been great, but I know we're running out of time. I just want to make sure that we're going to definitely have another follow-up here in the coming weeks because there's been a lot of great content, and I know it's going to be a lot for me to digest and go back on because I think we got into play deep today. I think it's important that we get into play. And for the people who are listening to this, Jason and I, we probably talked for over an hour last week. We were supposed to be just an introductory call. We ended up talking for over an hour, and I feel like we've got a lot more still in us here. This has been a great conversation, Jason. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me anytime. Love talking about this stuff.
If people want to know more about you, where can they go?
They can go to Engerman.weebly.com. That's my main website at the moment. I'm working through. Yeah, I'm just working through that, and you can hit me up on Twitter. That would be great.
What's your Twitter handle?
That. That would make me happy.
What's your Twitter handle?
I'm at Dr. Jengerman.
Okay.
At Dr. Jengerman, JAENGERMAN.
All right.
Yeah, so those two spots.
Perfect. And you're also on LinkedIn, so they can look you up on there too, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, I've done a decent job of SEO. So if you put my name into Google, Jason Engerman, my stuff pops up.
All right. Dr. Jason Engerman, it was great to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much.
Anytime, James. Till next time. Thanks a bunch.
Thank you.
That will do it for this week on the Academy of Esports. I've been your host, James O'Hagan. You may follow me on Twitter at Jim O'Hagan. That's spelled at JIMOHAGAN. And through the Academy of Esports account at TAO Esports. That's spelled at TAOESPORTS. It's a great way to get the latest blog posts, podcast episodes, and news coming out of esports and education. And remember, you can continue your engagement by going to www.taoesports.com. You can also connect through Facebook at www.facebook.com/TAOesports. Thanks again for listening, and I look forward to our time again next week.